The rain poured down in sheets, casting a grim, shadowy pallor over the quiet suburban street. Suddenly, the stillness was shattered by the screeching of tires and the slamming of car doors. Furious shouts echoed through the night as a group of HOA officials swarmed a lone figure standing defiantly in the middle of the road. "This is your final warning, Mrs. Flores," the HOA president bellowed, his face flushed with rage. "Remove that unsightly basketball hoop from your driveway or face the consequences." Sarah Flores gripped the basketball in her hands, her knuckles whitening. "You have no right to dictate what I can do on my own property." She fired back, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. The HOA officials closed in, their eyes glinting with menace. "We have every right," the president sneered. "This community has standards to uphold, and you're making us all look bad." Sarah's gaze darted around, searching for a way out, but the HOA had her cornered. She knew these people. They were powerful, ruthless, and utterly convinced of their own righteousness. Crossing them would be dangerous, but she refused to back down. "I will not remove that hoop, she said, her voice low and steady. "It's for my son, and it stays. The president's eyes narrowed to slits. "So be it," he said, his tone dripping with malice. He raised his hand, and the other officials surged forward, intent on seizing the basketball hoop by force. Sarah braced herself, ready to fight tooth and nail to protect what was hers. But just as the officials closed in, a sudden flash of movement in the shadows caught her eye. She froze, her breath catching in her throat as a dark figure emerged from the gloom. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, a deep, gravelly voice rumbled. The HOA officials spun around, their expressions morphing from aggression to shock as they found themselves face to face with a mountain of a man, his arms crossed menacingly over his chest. "Who the hell are you?" the president demanded, his voice wavering slightly. The stranger stepped forward, his features finely illuminated by the streetlights. It was Marcus Wolf, a reclusive and enigmatic figure who had moved into the neighborhood just a few months ago. His piercing gaze swept over the HOA officials, and a chill ran down their spines. "I'm the guy who's going to make your lives a living hell if you don't leave this woman alone, he said, his voice low and dangerous. The president's eyes widened, and he took a step back, his bravado visibly faltering. "You can't interfere with HOA business," he stammered. Marcus let out a dark chuckle. "Oh, but I can. And I will." He turned to Sarah, his expression softening slightly. "Ma'am, I suggest you go inside and lock your doors. This is about to get ugly." Sarah hesitated, torn between the desire to stand her ground and the instinct to get to safety. But one look at the determination in Marcus' eyes convinced her. She nodded, her gaze hardening, and turned to walk away, casting a final defiant glance at the HOA officials. As she reached the safety of her home, she heard the sound of a scuffle erupting behind her, followed by the terrified shouts of the HOA officials. A small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. The battle had begun, Sarah Flores hurried inside her home, the sound of the confrontation between Marcus Wolf and the HOA officials spilling through the open doorway. She could hear the president's panicked shouts and the occasional grunt of effort as the men grappled with each other. What had I gotten myself into, she wondered, her heart racing. She knew Marcus was a formidable presence, but she had no idea the extent of his abilities or his motivations. As she locked the door and peered out the window, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt for dragging him into her battle with the HOA. The fight raged on outside, and Sarah watched with bated breath as Marcus easily fended off the group of officials, his movements fluid and precise. He seemed to anticipate their every move, dodging their attempts to subdue him with ease. "This is your last chance, Sarah heard Marcus growl, his voice barely audible over the commotion. "Leave now, or I'll make sure you regret ever setting foot on this street." The president, his face contorted with fear and rage, hesitated for a moment before turning to his subordinates. "Let's go, he spat, his words laced with venom. "We'll deal with this another way, As the HOA officials retreated to their cars, Sarah could see the seething anger in their expressions. She knew this wasn't the end of the conflict. The HOA would not give up that easily. They were a formidable and relentless opponent driven by their own twisted sense of power and control. Once the taillights of the HOA cars had disappeared into the night, Marcus approached the front door, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the porch. Sarah took a deep breath and opened the door, bracing herself for what was to come. "Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't know why you helped me, but I'm grateful." Marcus studied her for a moment, his features unreadable. "I don't like bullies, he said simply. "And I don't take kindly to those who try to abuse their power." Asterisk. Sarah nodded, understanding the implication. Asterisk, so what happens now? Asterisk, she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Asterisk now, asterisk, Marcus said, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Asterisk, we prepare for their next move. Asterisk. Over the next few days, Sarah and Marcus worked tirelessly, gathering information and strategizing their next steps. They combed through the HOA's bylaws, looking for any loopholes or weaknesses they could exploit. They also kept a close eye on the movements of the HOA officials, anticipating their next actions. Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood remained largely oblivious to the brewing conflict, going about their daily lives without a care in the world. But Sarah knew that the calm would not last. The HOA was a formidable enemy, and they would not take this challenge to their authority lightly. One evening, as Sarah and Marcus were poring over a stack of documents, a sharp knock on the door startled them. Sarah glanced at Marcus, her eyes widening with apprehension. Asterisk, it's them, asterisk, she whispered. Marcus nodded and motioned for her to stay back as he approached the door. He paused for a moment, then slowly pulled it open, revealing the smug, self-assured face of the HOA president. Asterisk, Mrs. Flores, asterisk, the president said, his voice dripping with false civility. Asterisk, we need to have a little chat. Asterisk. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she braced herself for the next round of the battle. The war for control over her own home was just beginning, and she knew that the stakes were higher than ever. The HOA president's icy gaze swept over Sarah and Marcus, his lips curling into a condescending smile. I see you've made a new friend, Mrs. Flores, he said, his tone laced with barely concealed disdain. Sarah felt her hackles rise, but she forced herself to remain calm. What do you want? She asked, her voice steady. The president's eyes narrowed. We decided to take a more proactive approach to enforcing the community's standards, he said, his words dripping with menace. And we're starting with that unsightly basketball hoop in your driveway. Marcus stepped forward, his imposing presence filling the doorway. I believe we made it clear that the hoop stays, he growled, his eyes narrowing. The president's expression darkened, but he refused to be cowed. Mr. Wolf, was it? He said, his tone dripping with feigned civility. I'm afraid this is none of your concern. This is a matter between the HOA and one of its residents. Sarah felt a surge of anger. It became his concern when he tried to strong-arm me, she snapped, and it's still his concern as long as he chooses to be involved. The president's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might lash out. But then, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. Well then, he said, his voice smooth and oily, I suppose we'll have to involve the entire community. Before Sarah or Marcus could react, the president turned and strode back to his car, his subordinates following close behind. Sarah watched, her heart racing as they drove off, their taillights disappearing into the night. What did you mean by that? She asked, her voice trembling with apprehension. Marcus shook his head, his brow furrowed with concern. I'm not sure, but it can't be good, he said. We need to be on our guard. Over the next few days, Sarah and Marcus kept a close eye on the neighborhood, but they saw no immediate signs of the HOA's promised retaliation. The streets remained quiet, and the other residents seemed blissfully unaware of the brewing conflict. But then one afternoon, as Sarah was working in her garden, she heard the unmistakable sound of an approaching vehicle. She looked up to see a large SUV pulling up to the curb, its tinted windows concealing its occupants. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as the driver's side door opened and a group of people began to spill out. To her horror, she recognized them as members of the HOA, and they were not alone. Trailing behind them were a dozen or so other residents, their expressions ranging from confusion to excitement. Sarah watched in dismay as the HOA officials strode up her driveway, their faces set in grim determination. Mrs. Flores, the president said, his voice dripping with false concern, we've received numerous complaints from your neighbors about the condition of your property. I'm afraid we have no choice but to issue a citation and impose a fine. Sarah felt a surge of panic. What? But there's nothing wrong with my property, she protested, her voice shaking. The president's lips curled into a cruel smile. Ah, but you see, your neighbors have a different opinion. He gestured to the gathered crowd, who murmured in agreement. Sarah's eyes widened with realization. The HOA had turned the other residents against her, using their own petty grievances and jealousies as a weapon. She felt a wave of betrayal wash over her, and she opened her mouth to argue, but a sudden movement in the corner of her eye caught her attention. Marcus was striding across the lawn, his expression thunderous. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, his voice booming. The president's smile faltered, and for a moment Sarah saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. But then he squared his shoulders and stood his ground. This is HOA business, Mr. Wolf, he said, his voice laced with menace. I suggest you stay out of it. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the gathering crowd, his jaw clenched in a hard line. Sarah watched, her heart pounding, as he stepped forward, his imposing presence commanding the attention of everyone present. Asterisk, this is not HOA business. Asterisk, he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Asterisk, this is a blatant attempt to harass and intimidate a homeowner who has done nothing wrong. Asterisk. The president's expression darkened and he opened his mouth to retort, but Marcus cut him off with a raised hand. Asterisk, save it. Asterisk, he snapped. Asterisk, I know exactly what you're trying to do and I won't let you get away with it. Asterisk. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, their expressions a mix of confusion and unease. Sarah could see uncertainty on their faces, and she felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps they were not as blindly loyal to the HOA as the president had hoped. The president's face flushed with anger, and he took a step forward, his finger jabbing accusingly at Marcus. Asterisk, you have no right to interfere in the affairs of this community. Asterisk, he spat. Asterisk, we are tasked with upholding the standards and values that make this neighborhood great, and we will not be intimidated by the likes of you. Asterisk. Marcus let out a harsh laugh, his eyes glinting with amusement. Asterisk, standards and values. Asterisk, he scoffed. Asterisk, more like petty power trips and bullying tactics. Asterisk. The president's nostrils flared and he turned to the crowd, his voice rising with righteous indignation. Asterisk, this man is a disruptive influence, trying to undermine the very foundations of our community. Are you all going to stand by and let him trample all over our hard-earned rules and regulations? Asterisk. A murmur of uncertainty rippled through the crowd, and Sarah could see the doubt and confusion on their faces. Some of them shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded in agreement with the president's words. Asterisk, that's enough. Asterisk, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the din. Asterisk. This is not a vote, and you have no right to turn these people against their neighbor. If you have a problem with Mrs. Flores, you'll have to go through me. Asterisk. The president's eyes narrowed, and he let out a harsh, mirthless laugh. Asterisk, go through you. All right, asterisk, he said, his voice dripping with menace. Asterisk. But you'll be the one regretting it in the end. Asterisk. With that, the president turned and gestured to his subordinates, who immediately began to fan out, handing out citation after citation to Sarah's bewildered neighbors. Sarah watched, her heart sinking, as the crowd reluctantly accepted the penalties, their protests quickly silenced by the HOA's show of force. As the HOA officials finished their work and retreated to their vehicles, Sarah turned to Marcus, her eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Asterisk, thank you. Asterisk, she whispered, her voice trembling. Asterisk. But what are we going to do now? Asterisk. Marcus' expression was grim, but there was a glint of determination in his eyes. Asterisk, we fight back. Asterisk, he said, his voice firm. Asterisk, and we fight dirty. Asterisk. Over the next few days, Sarah and Marcus worked tirelessly, poring over the HOA's bylaws and searching for any loopholes or weaknesses they could exploit. They uncovered a trove of damning evidence, from unfair fines and unreasonable restrictions to outright corruption and abuse of power. With each new discovery, their resolve hardened, and they knew that the time for passive resistance had long since passed. This was a war, and they were determined to win it, no matter the cost. As they prepared to launch their counterattack, Sarah couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension. She knew that the stakes were high and the consequences of failure could be devastating. But with Marcus by her side, she felt a sense of hope and determination that she hadn't felt in a long time. Asterisk, it's time to take the fight to them. Asterisk, she said, her voice steady and unwavering. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy and oppressive as Sarah and Marcus made their way through the dimly lit streets of the neighborhood. Their footsteps echoed against the pavement, the only sound breaking the eerie silence that had settled over the community. As they approached the HOA's headquarters, a sense of foreboding crept up Sarah's spine. She knew that what they were about to do was risky, but the thought of the HOA's continued abuse of power was more than she could bear. Asterisk, are you sure about this? Asterisk, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus turned to her, his eyes glinting with a fierce determination. Asterisk, we don't have a choice. Asterisk, he replied, his tone resolute. Asterisk, we have to stop them before they destroy this entire community. Asterisk. Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. She knew that Marcus was right. The HOA had gone too far, and they needed to be held accountable. As they reached the door to the HOA's office, Marcus paused, his hand resting on the handle. Asterisk, remember, we need to be careful and stay out of sight. Asterisk, he murmured. Asterisk, we can't afford to be caught. Asterisk. Sarah nodded again, her heart pounding in her chest. She followed Marcus as he quietly slipped inside, the dim light of the hallway casting long shadows across the floor. They moved cautiously, her senses on high alert, as they made their way towards the office of the HOA president. Sarah could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, and she had to suppress the urge to bolt. Finally, they reached the door, and Marcus gestured for Sarah to take a step back. Slowly, he eased the door open, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The office was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the computer monitor on the president's desk. Marcus motioned for Sarah to follow, and they slipped inside, their footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. Sarah's gaze immediately fell upon the computer, and she felt a surge of determination. Asterisk, let's see what secrets this bastard is hiding. Asterisk, she whispered, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. As she delved into the files, her eyes widened with each new discovery. Embezzlement, bribery, and a web of shady financial dealings, the HOA president had been lining his own pockets at the expense of the community. Asterisk, we've got him. Asterisk, Sarah breathed, a triumphant grin spreading across her face. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. Asterisk, now we need to make sure he pays for his crimes. Asterisk. They quickly set to work copying the incriminating files onto a thumb drive and carefully covering their tracks. As they made their way out of the office, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and satisfaction. Asterisk, this is it, asterisk, she said, her voice hushed but filled with determination. Asterisk, we're going to bring this whole rotten system crashing down. Asterisk. But just as they were about to reach the exit, a sudden movement in the shadows caused them to freeze. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as a figure emerged, the dim light revealing the unmistakable form of the HOA president. Asterisk, well, asterisk, the president drawled, his lips curling into a malicious smile. Asterisk, what do we have here, asterisk? Sarah and Marcus instinctively took a step back, their hearts racing. The president's eyes narrowed as he took in the sight of the thumb drive in Sarah's hand. Asterisk, I should have known you two were up to no good, asterisk, he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. Asterisk, but I'm afraid your little crusade ends here. Asterisk. He took a step forward, his hand reaching into his jacket. Sarah and Marcus tensed, ready to defend themselves, but before the president could make a move, a sudden sound from outside caught their attention. The sound of sirens, growing louder with each passing second. The siren's wail pierced the air, causing the HOA president to freeze in his tracks. His eyes darted towards the window, panic etching itself across his features. Asterisk, what have you done? Asterisk, he growled, his gaze snapping back to Sarah and Marcus. Sarah couldn't suppress the triumphant smile that tugged at the corners of her mouth. Asterisk, we brought in the cavalry, asterisk, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. The president's face contorted with rage, and he lunged forward, his hands reaching for the thumb drive. But Marcus was faster, his large frame blocking the president's path. Asterisk, I wouldn't do that if I were you, asterisk, Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. Asterisk, Cunless, you want to add assault to the list of charges. Asterisk. The president hesitated, his eyes darting between Sarah, Marcus, and the approaching sirens. He knew he was cornered, and the realization sent a shiver of fear down his spine. Asterisk, you won't get away with this, asterisk, he hissed, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. Asterisk, go, but we already have, asterisk, Sarah said, her tone dripping with triumph. Asterisk. The police are on their way, and we have the evidence to bring down your entire corrupt organization. Asterisk. The president's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, he looked utterly defeated. But then, a glimmer of hope flickered in his eyes, and a sly smile crept across his face. Asterisk, you may have won this battle, asterisk, he said, his voice laced with a chilling confidence. Asterisk. But the war is far from over. Asterisk. Before Sarah or Marcus could react, the president darted towards the window, shattering the glass with his elbow and vanishing into the night. They rushed to the window, but the president had already disappeared, leaving them with a growing sense of unease. The sound of sirens grew closer, and moments later, a flurry of police cars descended upon the HOA headquarters. Sarah and Marcus emerged from the building, their hands raised in surrender as the officers swarmed around them. Asterisk, what's going on here? Asterisk, the lead officer demanded, his expression a mix of confusion and suspicion. Sarah quickly explained their findings, handing over the incriminating evidence they had uncovered. The officer's eyes widened as he reviewed the files, and he immediately radioed for backup, ordering his team to secure the building. As the investigation unfolded, Sarah and Marcus found themselves at the center of a media frenzy. News of the HOA's corruption quickly spread, and the community was in an uproar, with residents coming forward with their own tales of abuse and intimidation. But despite the public outcry, Sarah couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over her. The president's parting words had left her on edge, and she knew that he was not one to admit defeat so easily. Asterisk, he's still out there, asterisk, she murmured to Marcus, her voice laced with concern. Marcus nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. Asterisk, we need to be vigilant. Asterisk, he said, his tone grave. Asterisk, this isn't over yet. Asterisk. In the days that followed, the investigation continued, with the police uncovering more and more evidence of the HOA's extensive corruption. Several members of the board were arrested, and the president's whereabouts remained unknown. But despite the apparent victory, Sarah couldn't help but feel that the calm was merely the eye of the storm. She knew that the president would not rest until he had regained control, and she feared that the worst was yet to come. As she lay awake at night, the sound of the rain pounding against her window, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. One thing was certain, though. She and Marcus were in for the fight of their lives. The days that followed the police raid on the HOA headquarters were a whirlwind of activity. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, eager to capture every new development in the unfolding scandal. The community, once divided, now stood united in their outrage over the corruption that had been festering beneath the surface. Sarah and Marcus found themselves at the center of the media storm, their faces splashed across the headlines as the heroes who had brought down the corrupt HOA regime. But as the dust began to settle, a growing sense of unease crept back into Sarah's mind. Asterisk, he's still out there. Asterisk, she murmured to Marcus, her voice tinged with anxiety. Asterisk, the president, he's disappeared, and I can't shake the feeling that he's planning something. Asterisk. Marcus nodded, his brow furrowed in contemplation. Asterisk, I know. Asterisk, he said, his tone grim. Asterisk, we need to stay vigilant. This isn't over yet. Asterisk. As the investigation continued, the police uncovered more and more evidence of the HOA's nefarious activities. Embezzlement, bribery, and even instances of intimidation and threats against homeowners. The depths of the corruption were staggering. But despite the mounting evidence, the former HOA president remained elusive, evading the authorities with a skill that suggested he had been planning his escape for some time. Asterisk, he's not just going to roll over and accept defeat. Asterisk, Marcus said, his eyes narrowing. Asterisk, he's going to come back, and he's going to come back hard. Asterisk. Sarah couldn't help but agree. The president's parting words still echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder that he was not one to be trifled with. One night, as Sarah was locking up her home, the sudden movement in the shadows caught her eye. She froze, her heart pounding as a figure emerged, their features obscured by the darkness. Asterisk, who's there? Asterisk, she called out, her voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, and Sarah felt her blood run cold. It was the HOA president, his eyes glinting with malice. Asterisk, Mrs. Flores. Asterisk, he said, his voice dripping with feigned civility. Asterisk, I'm so glad I caught you. I have a little proposition for you. Asterisk. Sarah's mind raced, her thoughts tumbling over one another as she tried to formulate a plan. She knew she couldn't trust this man, but the thought of confronting him alone sent a shiver of fear down her spine. Asterisk, what do you want? Asterisk, she asked, her voice barely of a whisper. The president's lips curled into a sinister smile. Asterisk, I want my life back. Asterisk, he said, his tone darkening. Asterisk, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get it. Asterisk. Before Sarah could react, the president lunged forward, his hand clasping around her throat. She gasped, her vision blurring as she struggled to breathe, and she could feel the panic rising within her. But just as she was about to give in to the darkness, a familiar voice rang out, cutting through the silence like a bolt of lightning. Asterisk, get your hands off her, you bastard. Asterisk. It was Marcus, his face twisted with rage as he charged towards the president, his fist raised in a devastating blow. The president's grip on Sarah's throat loosened, and she collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. She watched in horror as the two men grappled, the sound of their fists connecting echoing through the night. The battle raged on, with neither man willing to back down. Sarah watched, her heart pounding, as the president fought with desperate ferocity, his eyes wild and his movements erratic. But in the end, it was Marcus who emerged victorious, his massive frame towering over the battered and bruised figure of the former HOA president. Asterisk, it's over. Asterisk, Marcus growled, his voice dripping with contempt. Asterisk, you're finished. Asterisk. The president's eyes widened, and for a moment, Sarah saw a glimmer of fear in his expression. But then his lips curled into a twisted smile, and he let out a dark, chilling laugh. Asterisk, it's only just begun. Asterisk, he whispered. The president's words sent a chill down Sarah's spine, and she felt her heart racing as she watched Marcus towering over the battered man. The night was still and silent, save for the heavy breathing of the two combatants and the faint sound of sirens in the distance. Asterisk, what do you mean it's only just begun? Asterisk, Marcus demanded, his voice laced with suspicion. The president let out a hoarse, mirthless laugh. Asterisk, you think you've won, don't you? Asterisk, he sneered. Asterisk, but this is just the beginning. I have connections, resources, and a network of loyal supporters who won't rest until I'm back in power. Asterisk. Sarah felt a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. She had always known that the president was a formidable opponent, but the level of his ambition and the depth of his resources were truly staggering. Asterisk, you're finished. Asterisk, Marcus growled, his grip tightening on the president's collar. Asterisk, the police are on their way, and this time you won't be able to slither away. Asterisk. The president's eyes narrowed and a twisted smile spread across his face. Asterisk, oh. I have no intention of running. Asterisk, he said, his voice dripping with malice. Asterisk, in fact, I have a little surprise waiting for you. Asterisk. Before either Sarah or Marcus could react, the sound of screeching tires and shattering glass pierced the night. A black SUV came barreling down the street, its tinted windows obscuring the identity of the driver. Marcus reacted instantly, shoving the president to the ground and positioning himself between Sarah and the oncoming vehicle. But the SUV showed no signs of slowing down, and Sarah felt a surge of terror as she realized they were about to be run down. Asterisk, Marcus, asterisk, she screamed, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. But just as the SUV was about to collide with them, a sudden blur of motion flashed across her vision, and the vehicle swerved, crashing into a nearby parked car with a deafening impact. Sarah stared in shock as the wrecked SUV came to a halt, smoke billowing from the crumpled hood. The driver's side door swung open and a figure stumbled out, their silhouette barely visible in the shadows. Asterisk, what the asterisk, the president whispered, his face a mask of disbelief. Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. Asterisk, I'm afraid your little plan has failed, Mr. President, asterisk, Marcus said, his tone dripping with triumph. Sarah's eyes widened as the figure emerged from the shadows, revealing the unmistakable form of the former HOA president. But he was not alone. Flanking him were two police officers, their weapons drawn and their expressions grim. Asterisk, you're under arrest, asterisk, one of the officers barked, his voice firm and unyielding. The president's face contorted with rage, and he let out a guttural scream of frustration. Asterisk, this isn't over. Asterisk, he roared, his voice echoing through the silent street. As the police officers handcuffed the president and led him away, Sarah turned to Marcus, her eyes shining with a mix of relief and disbelief. Asterisk, how? Asterisk, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus smiled, a glint of pride in his eyes. Asterisk, I had a feeling he might try something like this. Asterisk, he said, his tone matter of fact. Asterisk, so I called in a few favors. Asterisk. Sarah shook her head in wonder, a grateful smile spreading across her face. Asterisk, you're amazing, you know that. Asterisk, she said, her voice filled with awe. Marcus chuckled, his expression softening. Asterisk, just did what needed to be done. Asterisk, he said, his gaze sweeping across the scene of chaos and destruction. Asterisk, this community has been through enough. Asterisk. As the police cars and ambulances arrived, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. The battle had been won, but she knew that the war was far from over. The HOA would not give up without a fight, and she knew that she and Marcus would need to remain vigilant. But for now, she was content to bask in the glow of their hard-won victory, knowing that they had taken the first step towards reclaiming their community and restoring justice. Asterisk, the fight was not over, but the tide had turned. Asterisk.